Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Welcome again to Islam Between the Lines. My name is Farooq. This is the third episode of the second series on the topic of imperative of investment. In the second episode, we have seen that Quran assures profitability of spending and investment in spite of the risks involved. It also spells out the wrong and the right forms of investment. However, our discussion so far revolved around individuals. Yet there are countless enterprises that need huge investment, which may not be possible at individual levels, both for the amount of risk involved and for want of the necessary capital. Quran has addressed this issue through its chapter 42 that goes by the name of Ashura or consultation. The word consultation occurs just once in its verse number 38, which characterizes believers as the people who conduct their affairs by parlays and then spend what God has given them. This is a clear allusion to institutionalizing the investment because only the institutions of finance can do justice to the doctrine of consultation for investment. Institutionalization would facilitate big investments that might not be otherwise advisable at individual and personal levels. When we fail or neglect to spend our wealth, especially as investors, we are not only foiling its growth but are also denying others the opportunities to generate their wealth through the use of our investment. The Prophet ﷺ once addressed the people and said, "He who is guardian of an orphan who has wealth should do business with it and should not leave it behind to be consumed by expenses." Jamia Tirmizi, chapter 7, hadith number 25. At another occasion, he has said that keeping gold and silver out of circulation is a form of disruption on earth. Muwatta Malik, chapter 31, hadith 37. Spirituality is also preferred by many over absorption in this world. They consider striving for the other world as better and do not mind giving a miss to this one. This view is hit by Quranic instruction enshrined in verse 77 of its chapter 28. And with what Allah has given you, seek the abode of the hereafter, and do not ignore your share in the world, and do excel as Allah has excelled with you, and seek not disruption on earth. Verily, Allah does not love those who disrupt. Unquote. Thus, the failure to excel in this world is a kind of disruption which is detested by Allah. A person called Jabir or Jubair said, "I went to the Caliph Umar to ask for something I needed. I reached Medina during the night and went straight to him. I have been given intelligence and eloquence or logic. I had trivialized everything in this world and had abandoned it as not being worth anything." At Umar's side was a man with white hair and white clothes. When I had finished speaking, he said, all that you said is almost correct, except for your attack on this world. Do you know what this world is? Indeed, this world is where we reach, or he said, where we add up to the hereafter, and in it our deeds for which we shall be rewarded in the hereafter are. He also said, a man who knew this world better than I do worked in it. I asked, O chief of the believers, who is this man by your side? He replied, the master of the Muslims, Ubay bin Ka'b radiallahu anh. Adab al-Mufarrad, chapter 27, hadith number 2. We can live up to the performance of our solemn duty to spend by actually spending what we have. Escape is not any performance. A similar perception that also holds many of us back is that we must retain our earnings in our lifetime and let our heirs have them after us. This too is detestable. Once a man came to the Prophet and asked, O Apostle of Allah, which spending has the highest reward? He said, that spending which you do when you are healthy, niggardly, afraid of poverty, and expecting riches. Do not delay it to the time of approaching death and then say, give so much to such and so much to such and such. And indeed, it has already vested in him. Sahih Bukhari, chapter 24, hadith number 23. Likewise, a Madinite willed that his slave shall be free after his death. As this news reached the Allah's apostle, he asked the man if he had any other property. The man said, no. The Prophet said, who will buy this slave from me? A companion bought him for 800 dirham. The Prophet came with this amount and gave it to the owner, instructing thus, begin with yourself by spending of it. Then if anything is spared, that's for your family. Then if anything is spared after spending on your family, then that is for your near ones. Then if anything is spared after spending on your near ones, that is for so and so, saying in front of you, on your right and on your left. Sahih Muslim chapter 12, hadith number 50. So we have seen that spend we must, both as consumers as well as investors. Now this presupposes the availability of wealth. A question arises that if you are in need of something essential, but you do not have the money, should you borrow to spend for that thing? Similarly, if you have some skill and the capacity to work but are lacking in finance, should you borrow to invest? The answer to both these questions is a big yes. A companion named Suleiman lent to another companion, Alkama, 1000 dirham until he got his salary. When Alkama got his salary, Suleiman demanded his loan and was quite harsh in that. Alkama repaid but was angry also. After some months, he came again for a similar loan. Suleiman said, sure, it will be an honor. Then he told his slave woman to get him that sealed bag which Alkama had brought. She brought it, and he said to Alkama, by Allah, these are the dirham you repaid and I have not removed a single dirham from it. Alqama said, for Allah's sake, had your father made you to do what you did to me? Sulaiman replied, I did that for what I had heard from you only. Alqama asked, what had you heard from me? He said, I had heard from you that Ibn Masud has said that the Prophet has said, there is no Muslim who lends a loan to a Muslim twice, but it will be like sadaqah once. Alqama confirmed that Ibn Masud had indeed told him that. Sunan Ibn Majah, chapter 15, hadith number 41. Another point made out by this hadith is that lending is not sadaqah. It's only deemed as sadaqah if and when repeated for the same person. That means non-recoverability is a characteristic of sadaqah, unlike loans and advances that are recoverable by lenders and repayable by the borrowers. Borrowing for the purpose of investment is not just permitted, it is highly desirable also. A person having got the wealth to invest may not be personally in a position to manage its investment. For him, the best option is to lend it, but he can lend it only when someone else is willing to borrow. Lending is of two types, one in which the lender is also involved in utilization of the loan, and the other in which he is not so involved. According to a hadith of Sunan An-Nasai, land is like the wealth put into a mudarba, which means a limited partnership. Whatever is valid for wealth put into a mudarba is equally valid for land, and whatever is not valid for wealth is not valid for land. There's nothing wrong with giving all one's land to a tiller for tilling it personally or through his children and helpers and oxen, but without spending anything on it. All expenses would be paid by the owner of the land. Chapter 35b, Hadith number 73. In Mudarba, Mudarrib is the person who contributes his labor or skill, and Sahib Mal is the one who invests the money. Mudarrib is accountable to the investor. Sunan Nasai, chapter 35b, Hadith number 80. This will be different from an ordinary partnership called Ishtarak or Shirka, in which all the partners participate. Three companions, namely Abdullah, Saad, and Amr, entered into a partnership on the day of Badr, agreeing to share what would be given to them. Eventually, only Saad came with two prisoners, and the other two had nothing. Sunan An-Nasai, chapter 44, hadith number 249. Another situation is where the borrower is solely responsible for utilization of the loan. According to Bulugh al-Maram, Hakim bin Hazim used to put these conditions on his loanee or mudarba or mukarada. You shall not use my property in livestock or ferry it by sea or settle it in riverbed. And if you do any of these things, you shall be guaranteeing my property. Chapter 7, Hadith number 154. So a lender may at times lend for specified purposes and take limited risk. Abdullah and Ubaidullah, both sons of Umar bin Khattab, had gone out with the army to Iraq. On their way back, they passed by Abu Musa Ash'ari, who was the Amir of Basra. He welcomed them and said that he would do for them if he could do anything for their benefit. Then he added, "Oh, yes, here is some wealth from the property of Allah that I want to send to the chief of the believers. So I advance it to you, and you buy with it some Iraqi merchandise, which you later sell in Medina. Then you hand over the principal sum to the chief of the believers and keep the profit to yourselves." They said, "We would love to do that." So he gave them the amount and wrote a letter to Umar that he should take the same from them. When they came, they sold the items and made profit. Then they took the money to Umar, and he asked, "Did he make the advance to everyone in the army like he did to you?" They said, "No." He said, "Sons of the believers' chief, I'll give you advance, pay the principal as well as the profit." Abdullah was stunned, but Ubaidullah said, "What would you do, O chief of the believers, if this wealth had diminished or perished? We were assuredly responsible for it." Umar said, "Pay it all." Abdullah remained silent, but Ubaidullah repeated his point. On this, a man who was staying with Umar said, "O chief of the believers, what about making it a qirad, meaning a loan?" Umar said, "Okay, I treat it as a qirad." So Umar took the principal and half of the profit, and his sons Abdullah and Ubaidullah took only half of the profit. Muwatta Malik, chapter 32, hadith number 1. This shows, besides unconditional lending, that there should be no disuse of wealth, and that an advance is different from a loan. Although another highlight is that a leader should never consider himself as an embodiment of wisdom. He should keep consulting, especially on fiscal matters, independent persons of knowledge and wisdom. With loans and advances, the borrowers spend more than they otherwise could. So loans and advances efface their stinginess and make them more generous. Yet, in spite of these merits of borrowing, the Prophet ﷺ used to seek Allah's refuge from the preponderance of debt. But that should not dissuade us from borrowing. The Prophet never sought refuge from the debt per se. He sought it from preponderance of debt. The two epithets that he used with the word debt are dala and galaba. Literally, the former means a rib and the later overburden. Perhaps the most approximate meaning of these supplications should be that God protect us from the debts which bend us, thereby limiting our walking and running pace, or which otherwise overbear on us and on our power to walk or run well. The net effect, therefore, is that we should borrow but not overborrow. We should invest to venture, not to gamble. For other purposes, we should borrow only within reasonably essential limits. These general principles are surely open to exceptions also, but both usually as well as unusually, we will be our own judges, and none of us ought to deceive himself. Yet another aspect of borrowing is this: a person has taken a genuine loan that is repayable over a certain period of time. Suddenly, he happens to be able to pay off the loan earlier. Should he prepay it? The answer, to the surprise of most of you, is no. He should repay his loan only during the agreed term. North Medina has the famous mountain Uhud, which is 1077 meters high and 70,500 meters long. The Prophet once said, "If I had gold equal to Uhud, it would not please me that any bit of it remains with me beyond 3 days, except what I would keep for paying debts." Sahih Bukhari, chapter 43, hadith number 5. Just ponder. Uhud much of gold means gigatons of the precious metal. And the Prophet said that he would not take more than 3 days to distribute all of it with so much generosity to stress. He, however, adds that he would create a provision for his debt from that gold, but would not prepay the loan. This is in contrast to the inheritance, which Quran says should be distributed only after satisfying a will, if any, and paying off the debts. Chapter 4, verses number 11 and 12. The reason for not prepaying the loan is to ensure profitability for the lender. He must continue to earn when the borrower is earning with the help of his loan. In modern parlance, Islam motivates the borrowers to ensure that their loans should never become non performing assets for want of their ability to pay or for their ability to prepay. We have already seen that the Prophet chose to die in the state of indebtedness because the term of the loan had not expired then. There is another care also that Islam has taken of the creditors. The distressed debtor is one of the few persons eligible for zakat that's payable by the rich on their surplus wealth. Quran chapter 9, verse number 60. This verse mentions these debtors with the captives, both of whom can be discharged with the help of zakat. For a distressed debtor, zakat is actually used to pay off his loan. So, this arrangement actually provides for payment to the lender in the debtor's name. This is to encourage the investors to keep investing. Perhaps the biggest thing yet about borrowing is the assurance of repaying Muslims' loans by the Prophet himself. This is doubtless a huge favor which is conditional though. The Prophet has said, "He who leaves behind wealth, that is for his heirs, and he who leaves behind a debt or a loss, that's upon and for me, as I am preferable to the believers." Sunan Ibn Majah, chapter 15, hadith number 27. In another version, he is reported to have said, "I am preferable to the believers over themselves." So whoever dies with a debt over him and leaves nothing for its repayment, then its repayment is on us, and whatever property one leaves is for his heirs. Sahih Bukhari, chapter 85, hadith number 8. Whenever a dead person in debt was brought to Allah's Apostle, he would ask, has he left anything to repay his debt? If he was told that he has left something to repay his debt, he would offer his funeral prayer. Otherwise, he would tell the Muslims to offer their companion's funeral prayer. Then, as Allah opened victories for him, the Prophet said, I am preferable to the believers over themselves. So, if one of the believers dies leaving a debt, its repayment is upon me, and who leaves property leaves it for his heirs. Sahih Bukhari, chapter 39, hadith number 9. The reason mentioned in the Prophet by the Prophet for this blessing makes it permanent enough to avail all of us. It's a favor reciprocal to the believer's obligation mentioned in these two verses of the Quran. One, the Prophet is preferable to the believers over themselves. Chapter 33, verse 6. And 2, but know by your Lord they will not be believing until they make you the judge of what is in dispute between them, and do not find in themselves any dislike for what you adjudge, and surrender in submission. Chapter 4, verse 65. Further defining this obligation, the Prophet has said, none of you will be believing until he loves me more than his father, his son, and all mankind. Sahih Bukhari, chapter 2, hadith number 8. One day Umar said to him that he was dearer to him than everything except himself. The Prophet said, by him in whose hand my life is, not until I am dearer to you than yourself. On that Umar said, then by Allah, now you are dearer to me than myself. He said, now Umar, your belief is perfected. Sahih Bukhari, chapter 83, hadith 12. What follows, therefore, is that a believer having even a little love for Allah's Apostle should not even think of duping his creditors. As long as a believer is sincere in his borrowings, he remains entitled to the Prophet's blessing of facilitating the repayment of his loan. A loan must be repaid, as the Prophet has said, that delay by a rich person is cruelty. Sahih Bukhari, chapter 43, hadith number 16. A woman used to borrow jewelry from the people and then retain it. The Apostle of Allah said, let this woman repent to Allah and His Apostle and return to the people what she has taken. Then, as she did not do the needful, the Allah's Apostle said, get up, O Bilal, take her hand and cut it off. Sunan an-Nasai, chapter 46, hadith number 20. A distressed debtor's bailout with zakat is a third-party assistance. At times, the creditor himself is also expected to be helpful. Ka'ab bin Malik said that he demanded his loan from Ibn Abi Hadrad, and their voices grew so loud that Allah's Apostle heard them in his house. He came to them and called, O Ka'b bin Malik. O Ka'b, I replied, I present myself, O Apostle of Allah. Then he gestured with his hand to me, Halve your debt. I said, Done, O Allah's Apostle. The Apostle of Allah said to Ibn Hadrat, Get up and pay off. Sahih Bukhari chapter 8, hadith number 119. Quite like the bailout with zakat, in which lender is actually benefited. The lenders of the believers are the ultimate beneficiaries of the Prophet's blessings of repayment assurance. And these lenders may be Muslims and non-Muslims. However, the systemic form of this assurance would better be that an Islamic government invariably ensures that no one is duped of his lending or investment. The investments of both domestic and foreign investors should be equally protected without exception. Foreign investors have an extra issue of exchange rate in these times of paper currencies, which are valued by the respective governments according to their own conveniences and preferences. The necessary protection can be afforded to them by revising exchange rates only prospectively. In this way, an exporter and an investor shall be assured of the same exchange rate that prevailed when he brought in the goods or an investment. When he wants to take out his price or investment, he should get the same rate. Till then, he can benefit from the stability and any upward revision of the same. Otherwise, also, government has an important role as facilitator of commerce, and that role has to be played with sincerity and proficiency. Umar employed a free slave called Hunay over Hima, a pasture allocated for grazing of zakat and other specified animals. So he instructed him, O Hunay, don't oppress Muslims and fear invocation of the victim. Verily, victim's invocation is answered. And allow the owner of a few camels and that of a few sheep to graze their animals. And take care not to allow Abdul Rahman bin Auf and Usman bin Affan. For if their livestock perishes, they will return to their palm trees and crops. But if the livestock of those who own a few camels and those who own a few sheep perishes, they will turn up with their sons to say, O chief of believers, O chief of believers. Can I turn them away saying, I am not your father? So it is easier for me to let them have water and grass rather than giving them gold and silver. By Allah, these people think that I wronged them. This is their land and they fought for it during the pre-Islamic period and they embraced Islam over it only. By him in whose hand my life is, were it not for the animals which I give to ride in Allah's cause, I would not have made a span of their land into Hima. Sahih Bukhari chapter 56, hadith number 264. So the affluent should be left to fend for themselves, as they can easily afford to do that. Government should enable and encourage the poor to stand and stay on their legs. That will spare its avoidable effort and cost of supporting those impoverished by official neglect and apathy. With these words, I conclude this third and final episode on imperative of investment. Again, with my best wishes for improvement in the social media, which afford free